Imagine for a moment that you are sitting in a modern high school math class. The old, dusty chalkboard is long gone, replaced by a sleek, glowing smartboard. The students are working on laptops provided by the district, but beneath the surface of that classroom, there is a silent, invisible infrastructure running. It is a complex web of software making rapid-fire, automated decisions about who gets attention, who gets resources, and even how a specific student's long-term potential is measured, categorized, and tracked. Welcome to our podcast. Today, we are bringing you an essential insights analysis of a truly eye-opening nonfiction book that tackles this exact reality. It is called The Promises and Perils of AI in Education. Ethics and Equity have entered the chat, written by Ken Shelton Dee Lanier. You are experiencing a unique two-voice AI conversation powered by Google's Notebook LM for deeper, more dynamic book analysis, presented by Mindful Moments. Nourish your mind on the go.
Thank you. And, the most concerning part of that scenario you just described is that almost everyone in that room, including the highly trained educator standing at the front teaching the class, likely has absolutely no idea how that underlying infrastructure actually works on a mechanical level.
It is a staggering thought, honestly.
Yeah.
And I think that is why this book feels so urgent right now. Because usually when we hear about artificial intelligence entering the school system, the conversation tends to veer into one of two very predictable directions.
Oh, yeah. It is almost an exhausted debate at this point. I mean, it is either this massive existential panic about students cheating on term papers, or it is a frantic rush by administrators to find a quick how-to manual for generating faster lesson plans.
Right, yeah, the whole how to work faster approach.
Exactly, which is precisely the narrative that Shelton and Lanier completely reject in this book.
They really do. From the very first page, this book operates as a values-first guide. They argue, and I think very convincingly, that we cannot talk about this new technology without putting ethics and equity at the absolute center of the conversation. Like, if you ignore those factors and just focus on the software, you are entirely missing the plot.
You are. And the mission of this book is bold. It is not trying to teach you which buttons to click to optimize a spreadsheet. The explicit goal here is to turn educators, parents, and thoughtful readers into active participants.
Activists, really.
Yes, exactly. AI activists. They want to empower you to shape how these platforms are deployed, rather than just accepting your role as a passive consumer of software built by someone else, in a tech hub thousands of miles away.
Let's unpack that a bit, because to understand why the authors reject that standard how-to manual approach, we really have to look at how they frame new technology historically.
Right.
They deliberately do not start with the code. They start with the people. It is like we are trying to teach kids driver's ed by only showing them how to press the gas pedal.
Oh, that is a great analogy, yeah.
Right, like without ever discussing traffic laws or road safety or who even gets to own a car in the first place.
Right, ignoring the entire context around the car.
Exactly. But let me stop you right there and push back a little, because I hear this a lot, and I think a lot of our listeners do too.
Sure.
A line of code is essentially just math, right? It is a tool. I mean, a hammer does not care who swings it. It just drives the nail. So how can software have an agenda or a bias? Isn't technology supposed to be the great equalizer?
Yeah, that is a very common assumption. But the book firmly dismantles this idea of tech neutrality. Technology is never truly neutral because the software inevitably deploys the values of its creators.
Okay, so how does that actually work?
Let's look at how it works on a mechanical level. The developers who build these massive generative models, they carry their own biases, their own blind spots, and, their own cultural assumptions.
Right.
So when they decide what professional writing looks like or what a standard answer should be, they bake those human elements right into the algorithms.
Wait, so if a team of developers from, say, one specific demographic or educational background trains a language model, the software will just naturally correct everything else to match that narrow, specific standard.
Exactly. It treats their specific cultural context as the objective baseline.
Wow.
Yeah, and throughout history, new technological leaps have either liberated communities or further harmed those who were already pushed to the margins. And the real strength of this book is that it centers those lived experiences over abstract computer science theory.
It makes a lot of sense when you ground it in history, honestly. Like, think about the massive technological and infrastructure shifts following World War II in the United States.
Oh, absolutely.
The benefits of those new highway systems and housing booms, they were not distributed equally at all.
No, not at all.
Redlining and discriminatory banking policies meant certain communities were entirely walled off from that progress. And Shelton and Lanier are pointing out that digital infrastructure works exactly the same way. If you are not actively designing the system for equity, you are passively designing it for inequality.
Precisely. Which brings us to the first critical question for you, the listener, to consider. When a new technology enters your classroom or your workplace, whose voices are usually the first to be heard, and whose are left on the margins?
Yeah, that is a powerful question. Because if we accept that technology is not neutral, we have to ask where this harm actually shows up in the physical classroom. Where does the rubber meet the road?
Well, the authors detail how skewed data and design choices encode unfairness directly into a student's daily life.
Uh,
Let's look closely at predictive analytics as a prime example of this data gap. Many school districts and universities, they purchase software to predict which students are at a high risk of dropping out or failing a course.
Okay, stop right there. How does the software actually predict that? Like, what is the mechanism?
It looks at historical data. The system pulls thousands of data points, zip codes, attendance records, past standardized test scores, and even disciplinary history.
Okay.
It processes all of that to flag at-risk kids so counselors can intervene.
But wait a minute. If those past standardized test scores and disciplinary records were already skewed by a history of systemic underfunding, or if a specific zip code has historically lacked resources, the software is not objectively measuring a student's potential.
Right.
It is just learning the historical bias and projecting it forward.
You hit the nail on the head. The algorithm simply learns that a student from that zip code is a higher risk. It does not factor in the systemic lack of support. It just flags the demographic. Yeah, and the automated system then justifies giving up on those students earlier or pushing them into lower-tier remedial tracks, which creates this devastating self-fulfilling prophecy.
That is chilling. I mean, we have all experienced a weird algorithmic recommendation online, right? Like a streaming service suggesting a movie you would never in a million years watch.
Right, and we just laugh it off.
Exactly, we laugh it off. But when that exact same flawed mathematical logic is used to grade a college admissions essay or to track an eighth grader's academic potential, the stakes are suddenly life-altering. It is taking human prejudice, hiding it inside a black box of complex code, and then calling it objective math.
Which is exactly why the authors argue this requires organized activism to dismantle.
Yeah.
And, automated proctoring systems during remote exams provide another highly concrete example of this. When schools shifted to remote testing, they used software to monitor students through their webcams.
Right, to make sure they weren't looking at notes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the mechanism behind that software relies on facial recognition.
And facial recognition requires contrast to map the topography of a face.
Yes. And because the training data used by those tech companies overwhelmingly featured lighter-skinned faces, the software struggled to recognize the faces of students with darker skin tones.
You are kidding.
No, students were being flagged for cheating or completely locked out of their final exams simply because the software could not read their facial features properly.
That is literal automated injustice playing out in real time on a Tuesday morning in a student's living room.
It really is. So the second question we have to ask you is this. How can we trust automated systems with high-stakes decisions when the data feeding them might be fundamentally flawed?
Wow. Okay, and this brings us to a massive contradiction happening inside the exact same classrooms. Because this divide in access isn't just happening between wealthy suburban districts and underfunded urban districts.
What?
Shelton and Lanier point out a signature tension happening under the same roof.
Yes. Schools are eagerly training teachers and administrators to use these new generative models. The goal at the administrative level is to save time, optimize workflows, draft parent emails, and generate weekly lesson plans.
Sure.
Yet simultaneously, student access to those exact same platforms is heavily restricted. It is policed tightly under the banner of preventing academic dishonesty.
It is essentially a rules for thee, but not for me dynamic. I mean, we are giving administrators and teachers a state-of-the-art calculator to do their taxes, but forcing the students to use a wooden abacus because using the calculator is deemed cheating.
Yeah, and to be fair, administrators do have a valid fear here, which is often called cognitive offloading.
Let's define that for the listener really quick. Cognitive offloading is basically when we rely on an external device to remember or process information for us.
Right.
It is the reason almost nobody remembers their best friend's phone number anymore. Like, our smartphones hold that information, so our brains do not bother. So the administrative fear is that if a machine writes the essay, the student's brain never actually learns the mechanics of logical reasoning or grammar.
Exactly. But the authors argue that this imbalance turns artificial intelligence into just another method for top-down control. By banning it for students while adopting it for staff, we completely ignore the reality of the professional world these students are about to enter.
Right.
Every major company is asking how to integrate these generative platforms to increase productivity. But if a high school senior does it to brainstorm an outline for a history paper, they face suspension.
It feels like we're punishing students for the very advancements we are actively celebrating in the corporate world. To treat students justly, this technology has to be reframed as a shared resource that builds student agency and critical capacity, rather than treating it like a surveillance mechanism to catch cheaters.
The book really challenges educators to rethink assessment entirely. If an automated system can easily complete an assignment in 5 seconds, well, perhaps the assignment itself needs to fundamentally evolve.
Yeah, that makes sense.
We should be assessing critical thinking, the messy drafting process, and the ability to verify information, rather than just the ability to regurgitate historical dates.
Which leaves us with a stark realization. Are we preparing students for the future if we treat the most powerful applications of their generation strictly as contraband?
And that policing of students usually stems from a fear of academic dishonesty. But the book argues there's a much more dangerous threat to truth in the classroom that we are not preparing students for at all.
Honestly, this part of the argument is incredibly alarming. We are talking about synthetic media, right?
Yes. The authors discuss the severe reputational risks and dangers posed by deepfakes and highly realistic artificially generated images, audio, and video that depict events that never actually happened.
It is terrifying.
It is. The mechanism here relies on generative adversarial networks, where two neural networks basically train each other until a fake image is indistinguishable from reality.
In previous discussions about this, people often use the analogy that we are sending kids into a wilderness where the compasses do not work. But I do not think that is accurate. It is much more malicious than a broken compass.
How so?
It is like someone flooded the high school cafeteria with highly sophisticated counterfeit $20 bills. If you do not actively teach the cashier how to check for the watermark, the whole economy of trust completely collapses.
Oh, that is a brilliant way to frame it. This is a daily reality for older teens and college students today. We are living in a world where a fake image or a manipulated audio clip can ruin a reputation overnight.
Yeah.
A student could be bullied, blackmailed, or completely ostracized using media that is entirely fabricated. The psychological toll that takes on a young person is massive.
I cannot even imagine.
Right. The book's focus on critical media literacy is framed as an essential survival skill for the modern world, not just a fun academic exercise.
The authors emphasize that media literacy can no longer just be about identifying biased news sources like we were taught 10 years ago. It now requires understanding how synthetic media is created on a technical level.
Absolutely.
Students need to learn how to spot the visual artifacts of digital manipulation, like weird shadows or strange audio clipping, and know how to verify authenticity in a landscape designed specifically to deceive them.
Because if we spend all our energy and resources trying to catch a student using an automated system to write a paragraph on Shakespeare, we completely miss the fact that they are drowning in manipulated realities on their social feeds the second the school bell rings.
Yeah.
That misalignment of priorities is exactly what Shelton and Lanier are trying to correct.
So the question becomes, in a world where seeing is no longer believing, how do we teach the next generation to verify the truth?
Well, faced with algorithmic bias, top-down policing, and the rapid proliferation of deepfakes, it is very easy to feel entirely overwhelmed by the sheer scope of the problem.
Sure.
But the authors deliberately end the book by telling us exactly what to do next. They urge readers to push for transparency, student-centered policies, and accountable systems in their own local institutions.
I love that they do not just leave you with the doom and gloom. They want you to ask hard questions at school board meetings and faculty planning sessions. Let's actually model what that looks like, because having these conversations in real life is tough.
It really is.
Imagine you want to bring the ideas from this book to a highly skeptical school administrator. Let's debate this fairly. I will play the role of the principal.
Okay, go for it. Establish your position.
Okay, put yourself in my shoes as the principal. My number one priority is making sure kids actually know how to construct a logical argument, read a text critically, and write a thesis statement before they use a generative platform to do it for them.
Right.
If I let them use it freely, they skip the struggle of learning. Cognitive offloading takes over. Why shouldn't I ban it on all school networks and devices to protect their foundational learning?
Okay, and representing the book's view, the counterargument would acknowledge your valid fear, but expand the context.
Okay, let's hear it.
I would say, principle, your goal is noble, but a total ban assumes that the kids who need the most help won't just be left behind. The students with resources and wealthy parents will simply use these platforms at home, on personal, unrestricted devices, getting miles ahead in their understanding of modern tools.
I see.
You aren't stopping the technology, you are just making sure only privileged students know how to wield it. Furthermore, a total ban fails to prepare any student for a professional world where these platforms are ubiquitous.
Okay, stepping out of character, that is how we find common ground. Both sides actually agree that student learning growth and safety are the top priorities. The disagreement is simply about the method.
Exactly.
Is it better to wrap the technology in bubble wrap, lock it in a cabinet, and pretend it does not exist? Or is it better to hand them the tool and teach them the safety manual?
Exactly. A fair debate recognizes the valid fears of the administrator. Foundational skills are undeniably important. You still need to know how to add and subtract.
Okay.
But the book provides the framework to show that integrating modern technology does not have to mean abandoning those foundational skills. It means evolving how those skills are taught and measured.
It is the difference between banning the calculator and teaching the student how to use the calculator to solve higher-level calculus problems. The math still matters, the method just advances.
Precisely.
So, what does this all mean for us today? Here's a final thought to mull over. If we build our educational policies entirely around trying to catch cheaters, we might inadvertently train an entire generation of students to be merely compliant subjects.
Wow, yeah.
We teach them to follow the rules and hide their tools, rather than becoming the critical thinkers and innovators we actually need to navigate a tech-driven world.
That is a vital perspective. Knowledge is most valuable when it is understood and applied to make systems fairer. Before we go, we want to leave you with 3 open questions to carry into your classrooms, your dinner tables, or your study groups.
Number 1. If you are a designated AI activist at your school or workplace today, what is the very first policy you would try to change?
Number 2, how can educators balance the very real need to assess a student's original thinking with the necessity of teaching them to use modern tools?
And number 3, what does equity actually look like to you in a digital age where the tools are constantly evolving?
Thank you so much for joining this conversation today.
Yes, thank you. Remember to stay curious, keep asking the hard questions, and keep looking for the voices on the margins. You have been listening to Mindful Moments.
Yeah.
Nourish your mind on the go. Until next time, remember that the invisible infrastructure running beneath the floorboards of our classrooms is something we can choose to rebuild. We just have to be willing to look at it.